Since we began, we've been following the imperial frontiers as they were on the eve of the Great War. From Bosnian Mostar in the south to Romanian Maramureș in the north, what was astonishing about these troubled multicultural lands was their stability.
I think one of the many myths that surround the Habsburg Empire is that it collapsed. Actually, it held together for 4 years of truly brutal warfare.
The Soviets had a very easy play because the Habsburg monarchy left these regions in a very rural and a very basic condition.
There was a failure to move into the modern age and to also sell to the people the fact that it had many ethnic groups, but it was in fact one commonwealth.
I would say that a centralized, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious state, to me that sounded like a very good, a very modern, a very human approach.
We're on our way now to the remotest corner of the empire, buried deep in the Carpathian Mountains. We've left Maramureș behind, and we're striking out to the northeast. Well, striking out is a bit of an exaggeration. We're chugging along the overgrown tracks in a rusty, tattered Personal train, stopping at every backwater between the Banat and Moldavia. At every station, people clamber on and off with huge, misshapen bundles and packets, while chickens wander aimlessly looking for food between the platforms. There are carts in the road piled high with freshly cut logs for the wooden houses which scatter the hillsides. We're into the land of the birch trees, the province of Bukovina.
This patch of featureless scrub beyond the hills is called Vadul Siret. Its only significance is that it cuts Bukovina in half, between Romania to the south and the Ukraine to the north, and provides the most laboured customs post so far.
As if the wait for the passports wasn't long enough, we have a longer wait now. They're giving us a new set of wheels. An hour and a half here to lift the train up, roll the wheels out from under it, roll a new set in, and lift the train down again. One empire, two railway systems. This is a consequence not of the Peace of Trianon, but the Peace of Yalta. Stalin made sure that Romania remained only with the southern half of Bukovina, the half that has the standard gauge railway, while the northern half of Bukovina was ceded to the Ukraine. Our destination is the remote Carpathian town of Chernivtsi. Since its Habsburg days as Chernivtsi, it's been part of Romania as Chernivtsi, and until 1989, part of the Soviet Union as Chernivtsi. The ghosts of the communist past still haunt Chernivtsi. I've fetched up at the Hotel Chernivtsi, and it's another piece of time travel. If you're a nostalgic for the old USSR, the Chernivtsi has everything you could wish for. Deafening pop music, tacky architecture assembled from third-rate materials. Oh yes, and lukewarm bathwater between 7 and 11 in the morning and 8 and 11 at night. And this is the best hotel in town. The wheel changing and the boot-face border controls added 2 hours to our journey. It took us 7 hours to cover the 100 kilometers from Suceava, and we arrived in Chernivtsi after nightfall, where I have to say things are looking up. I have 2 local helpers, Irina Zub from Lviv and Vitaly Yeremitsa, a local journalist from here in Chernivtsi, and they've planned a trip for me to one of northern Bukovina's strangest sights. Vitaly brought us back the way we came, to the border with Romania. We travelled along stony, unmade-up roads, crowded with chickens, past the rebogeying works at Vadul Siret, retracing the steps of last night. And this time, the 4-hour journey took less than an hour. And then, in the middle of the empty countryside, on the brow of a low hill, we saw an extraordinary sight. Deep in the heart of nowhere, a massive, gleaming Orthodox cathedral with green onion domes and gold crosses decked with gilded chains. We asked an old man with a Dostoevskian beard for directions, and now we know. We are in Bielekrenitsa, the village of the White Well, and the church is neither Ukrainian nor Orthodox. It's a church of Russian old believers who escaped the tyranny of the Patriarchate over 350 years ago. The sexton of Bielekrenitsa takes up the village's extraordinary story.
Это построена первая самая церковь, это 300 больше лет.
Yes, the old wooden church was built together with the village 300 years ago. A monastery was built when Bishop Ambrosi came here and founded a monastery and a nunnery. Ambrosi went into exile when the Moscow Patriarch Nikon persecuted the Russian old believers. Together with Peter the Great, Nikon threatened the true faith, and Bishop Ambrosi said that in the name of Christ, he is ready to go anywhere. So they came here to Bielekrenitsa.
During 50 years of Soviet governance, the cathedral did service as a grain store and a stable. But somehow the community stayed together. Only in the last decade has it metamorphosed into a village of old women. Katya Alexeyevna.
The authorities did nothing for us. Under the communists, we lived a normal life, even here in Ukraine. I used to live in the Donbass and we had everything we wanted. We had a house. And after my husband became disabled, we were given a flat which had everything we needed. And what was the result? A new government came. They gave us freedom. Who needs it? Only businessmen. Working people don't need it. We do not feel ourselves free. The only result of it is that we are not paid money anymore. Everything is very expensive. Before, you could buy 5 loaves of bread for a ruble. Now you can get only 1 if you're lucky. What is good in this? Nothing at all.
In 10 years, they'll all be gone. The average age will be 80, and the community, which has lasted for more than 300 years, will be dead. They survived their churches being turned into grain stores and stables. They survived invasion, and now they're falling victim to perestroika. The collective farm is gone, the nearest town is 50 kilometers away, and no one has transport. There's faith in abundance, but there's no hope. In the History Museum in Kobylyansky Street, in the town of Chernivtsi in the province of Bukovina, there's a small shrine. It's a touchingly naive reconstruction of an officer's quarters in the last decade of the Habsburg Empire. There's a simple writing desk, an officer's shako and sabre, family photographs and birth documents, and of course, the ubiquitous bust and portrait of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, His Majesty, Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary, Kaiser Franz Josef I. Among all the crown lands he commands, this little province of Lodomeria, Ruthenian Bukovina, is the most remote. But you can sense the Emperor's presence. Listen to this music box, with its flat metal discs spinning out the strains of the march composed by Strauss the Elder to commemorate a famous victory, the Radetzky March. And if the officer's wife couldn't get down to Vienna to buy the latest French modes, she could always do her shopping here in Kobylyanskaya, in this marvellous pedestrian precinct. If you look up there, you can see crusted loggias and proud caryatids and confident columns. Here, of all places, in the heart of rural Bukovina.
The historian, Professor Alexander Dobroshansky.
Chernivtsi became a modern city under Austria. And to some extent, we can say that Chernivtsi remains an Austrian city. It has Austrian architecture. Actually, the union with the Austrian Empire turned Chernivtsi into a European city.
The whole city seems to be waiting for a visit from the emperor. In the town museum, there's a meticulously carved wooden bed with a bear's crest made for his Jubilee visit in 1908. They pulled down the old railway station and built him a brand new one that same year. But the emperor never came. 1908 was a busy year for him, what with the 60th anniversary of his reign and the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Never mind. His hand touched this city in a remarkable and characteristic way. On one side of the square is another splendid neoclassical creation, with muscled caryatids and a Star of David on the side. The Jewish house, to match the Polish house, and the Ruthenian house and the Romanian house, scattered round the centre of town to affirm the rights and autonomy of Bukovina's polyglot peoples. And what's more, after 2 world wars and 50 years of the Soviet Union, it's still functioning. I'm due to meet the Jewish Society of Chernivtsi this morning.
Это здание построено в 1908 году, закончено.
This building was finished in 1908. At that time, the mayor of Chernivtsi was Jewish. His name was Edvard Reis. He made a large contribution to the development of Jewish culture here in Chernivtsi. It was a very rich organization.
The secretary of the Jewish Society is 89-year-old Yevgenia Finkel.
Наш город еще знаменит тем,
In the autumn of 1908, we hosted the first ever World Conference on Yiddish language and culture.
Первая мировая конференция языка идиш.
Once again, 50 heavy-handed Soviet years failed to fracture the community. The Yiddish poet, Simeon Tsigalkovsky.
Я думаю, что такое же, как и да. Ну, ведь о евреях у нас было двойственность всегда.
There was a double problem for Jews here under the Soviet Union.
А на практике, естественно, такого равенства не было.
Firstly, although the law said that everyone was equal, in fact, the reverse was the case. For example, quite frankly, there were some fields where Jews held 60% of posts in the Academy of Sciences. On the other hand, Jews were not allowed in practice to take leading roles in political life or in closed areas like the military. It was effectively state anti-Semitism.
This is another aging community, for much the same reasons as Bielokrenitsy.
Ну, я хочу сказать, что сейчас, честно говоря, немножко это дело все пошло на спад.
2 or 3 years ago, there was more activity among young people here. It was very lively.
Вот, молодежного еврейского, они все-таки все поуезжали. Вот. Еще пару лет назад...
There were clubs of all kinds. There were musical activities, social clubs and sports clubs.
Очень деятельный человек, председатель Союза еврейской молодежи города Черновцы.
The society had a very active leader, but he left the Ukraine, and things became much quieter.
Макаби, спортивное общество, вот, я немножко этим занимался.
People found it very easy to emigrate to America and Israel.
Что молодежь все-таки более подвижная, чем люди старшего поколения.
Nevertheless, Friday night is still celebrated here, even if the community can only manage biscuits and lemonade rather than wine and platted loaves.
Shalom, shalom, shalom.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagofen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagofen.
The railway north from Chernivtsi was an important strategic support system for the empire. It moved troops along two frontiers, the one with Ottoman Turkey to the south and the one with the Russian Empire to the east. Nowadays, it putters along through featureless, scrubby terrain, broken up by fields of sugar beet. Most of the stations are gutted or broken down. There are women sitting on thick bundles waiting for the trains. Dogs take the word sleeper literally and curl up between the points. And all along the track there are goats wandering and cropping the grass. Apparently this is railway land, given as a bonus to the railway workers to farm as a supplement to their incomes. The whole landscape has the desultory feel of the borderlands in the novels of Yosef Roth. And indeed, our next stop is the capital city of his home province of Galicia. This is another city with three names. On my train ticket it's called Lviv. When Yosef Roth studied here it was called Lemberg. My grandparents in Russia would have known it as Lvov, birthplace of another Jewish teller of tales, Sholem Aleichem. It was one of the most populous cities in the Jewish Pale of Settlement. But in this house, on the Ploshcha Rynek, it's really none of these. It's Lvov, a Polish city full of Baroque Catholic churches and a central square named after Poland's greatest romantic poet, Adam Mickiewicz. We're in one of the oldest houses on the square. It has a glorious Italianate courtyard, and it was designed originally for a Greek merchant and then taken over by the Polish royal family under Jan Sobieski. Upstairs here, we can see further evidence that Polish seed was planted well before the Habsburgs. All the furniture and decorations in this room are of Polish extraction. However, if we move into the central room, with its marvellous wood-inlaid floor, we can see one overwhelming historical fact that links this house and this city with the Habsburgs. In 1686, when the Russians were busy partitioning Poland, they signed a treaty here that ceded Galicia to the Austrian Empire.
I stand again at the gates of Europe. The Hotel Savoy, with its 7 stories, its gilded coat of arms, and its uniformed porter, seems to me more European than any other hotel in the East.
That's what the hero declares at the beginning of Roth's novella, Hotel Savoy. We're at the fag end of the Great War, slogging back from the trenches of the Russian front and the domestic cataclysm which followed. The mysterious eponymous hotel, with its hybrid clientele, its silent elevators and its invisible proprietor, is the grandest establishment in an old Habsburg frontier town. Roth's biographer claims that he based the hotel on an establishment in Łódź in Poland. Well, possibly, but Łódź was never a frontier town. My guess is he was elaborating on the Hotel Georges here, in the Galician capital city of Lviv. Let's go in and check. Well, it's the gateway to the west, all right. Smug and pink with repainted stucco and self-satisfied columns. Silent elevator seems to be missing. So's the bar. The mysterious clientele seem to be engaged in some surreptitious financial dealings. Still, there's a grand stone staircase with iron balustrades, as you would expect, because the Georges was designed by the ubiquitous Viennese architects Fellner and Helmer. They were beaten to the opera house by a Pole, but they hit back with a casino and this hotel. I'm delighted to say that the Habsburgs left more than casinos and caryatids and lodgers made of icing sugar. All round the prospects for Body, there are glimpses of the comfortable regional centre of government they established here in Lemberg. Most of all, in the Vienna Coffee House, which has 8 different varieties of the stuff. And my espresso is the nearest thing to a kleiner Schwarzer since Trieste. So how did this Polish-Austrian town, descended from Kievan Russia, become the center of Ukrainian nationalism? Back to those terrible disease-ridden days after the end of the Great War. For 18 months, Lviv was pushed backwards and forwards in the war between Russia and Poland, and then by the Treaty of Riga, which followed. After centuries of Russia and Austria, it became in quick succession part of a Ukrainian republic, then part of Russia again, this time Bolshevik Russia, and then Poland once more. Not for long, though. Once Russia entered the Second World War, she made sure that Galicia was reunited with the now socialist Republic of Ukraine to the east. In this, Russia was enormously helped by the Nazis, who'd removed most of the Poles and consigned 500,000 Galician Jews to the gas chambers. After Yalta, it was an easy task to remove all traces of Polish Lviv and Habsburg Lemberg and ensure that this became once and for all Ukrainian Lviv. The sounds and the smells of this market bear witness. The broad Slavic faces and the headscarf babushkas, the sour cream and pickles and the honey and the comb, they all tell the same story. This town has had its multicultural heart removed. To be fair, Galicia was always a centre of Ukrainian nationalism. Outside the market this Sunday morning, they're selling garlands of flowers for the Corpus Christi festival. And across the road, at the Bernardine Monastery and Church, the Uniats are celebrating the festival. Here in Lviv, the Greek Catholic Uniat Church developed a robust opposition to the Roman Catholic Poles and Austrians. In our own time, the Uniats led the movement to break away from the Soviet Union in the late 1980s. They'd been forced underground by the cozy alliance of the Kremlin and the Moscow Patriarchate. Now, the breakdown of the Soviet Empire gave them the opportunity to press for Ukrainian independence. But if you look across the street, you can see that the independence is only skin deep. On every corner there are stalls selling cut-price goods. A few blocks away there's an informal street market where women bring rice and pasta and second-hand children's shoes to eke out their meagre incomes. The Ukrainian economy is still in thrall to Russia for energy, for communications, for everything that makes a modern state function. And the price is high, and it's paid in dollars. It's something of an institution here on Sunday afternoons. People get together in Prospect Svobody and argue the toss about nationalist issues. Sometimes they even burst into song. The interesting thing, though, is that this meeting is almost entirely composed of people over the age of 50. The young people are strolling in the local park. They have no interest in the temporary sign erected on the lamppost across the road, which says, "Mr. President, resist Russification, resist genocide."
Everybody realizes here that Ukraine is a rich country, but the system under which Ukraine lived for 50 and eastern part for 70 years, they changed a person. I think that one of the most important things that people here are now only starting to create their own lives.
I'm having coffee with Irina Zub. She runs a travel business with her husband here in Lviv. Later on today, she's taking me off to the east, to the old Austro-Russian border, to seek out the locations of so many of Yosef Roth's stories. Irina was trained as a print technologist, but life in post-Soviet Western Ukraine is a complex and contradictory business.
A lot of people disagree with me because they said that they have a better life during Soviet times because they had works, they have stable job, and now some of them are knocked out of that mode of life. I think that they have lost themselves in this society, and a lot of them need help from the state, but it is not given to them. I think that it takes a lot of time, not 10 years even. I think that it must be, generation must change, then only we'll have prosperous state.
Ukraina, by the border, borderland. That's what the word Ukraine means in Old Slavonic, and that's what these lands have always been. The furthest reach of Kiev's fiat and Moscow's fiat in the Middle Ages and the Romanov Kingdom. The outer limits of the Kaiser's empire until the First World War. And the birthplace of Yosef Roth, and the dank, scrubby land where he set so many of his stories. Haven't quite reached it yet. It's a few dozen kilometers down the road. At least, I think it is. Roth said he was born in Schwabi, but I can't find Schwabi on any map. Still, he was a prodigious liar. He never knew his own father. His father was carted off to a mental hospital before the boy was born, and so Roth invented all manner of colourful identities for him. He was a Polish count. He was a Habsburg officer. Anything except the failed, unstable, small-town Jewish trader he actually was. And the truth about Roth's origins is as tangled and obscure as this frontier landscape. The greatness of Radetzky March is the way the author watches the empire disintegrate through the wrong end of a telescope. Most of it takes place hundreds of miles from Vienna, with all the Habsburg solidity dissolved in the muddy ditches and grubby streets on the outskirts of provincial towns. Just like today, just like here. There's a sense of something just out of reach, something dreamlike. Am I in a small town in the Ukrainian Republic 10 years after the fall of communism? I can't really believe I am. These low two-story houses, the deserted muddy marketplace, the caryatid street with birdlime, and all the rusty wrought-iron balconies. They belong 100 years ago. But I can't escape the echoes of those melancholy years just before the cataclysm of 1914. Down the road is Roth's old school, with an exhibition devoted to him kindly provided by the Austrian Institute.
Radetzky March, here, this the title and the first page of the novel, his famous novel, which he devoted to Brody and to the love between the Galician girl and an Austrian officer. There were just a lot of hardships between them, and after all, they separated. Yes, this tragic love.
I think that Roth would have been amused to hear his sardonic depiction of the dying days of empire transmuted into a sentimental cross-cultural love story. His distant, disintegrating outpost of the K&K Crown lands was a place to drink, gamble and rot. That's the railway station over there. Not very K&K. It was smashed up in the last war and replaced with a rather undistinguished Stalinist shoebox. The other side of the tracks has an authentic Yosef Roth feel to it, though. So does the barracks across the road, just like the one where young Lieutenant Trotter drank away his confusion. And what's over there in Cyrillic script? Vulitsa Josefa Rota. So this is Schwabi. It's a district of Brody. And Roth was ashamed to be born on the wrong side of the tracks. I can't help thinking of another Jewish boy who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. Not in Galicia, but in Moravia. Gustav Mahler. Like Roth, he was born between the barracks and the pub, and he wove all those trumpet calls and bum-swinging waltzes and sentimental ballads into symphonies which evoke the end of empire better than anything, except perhaps the novels of Yosef Roth. On the road back to Lviv is a ruined castle, Podgoretsky Zamok. The stone staircases are crazed, the loggias are crumbling, and the plasterwork is flaking from the rooms. This one belonged to the Pototsky family. Perhaps, just perhaps, Roth drew on his memories of it in the final part of Radetzky March. There's a big party in the grounds of a Polish estate. The whole officer corps is drunk. And then an orderly arrives with a message. The heir to the throne is dead. At first, no one believes them. Then they start arguing with each other, the Hungarians and the Slavs, the Slovenes and the Czechs. The young hero, Lieutenant Trotter, who's more drunk than anybody else, steps forward.
My grandfather saved the Emperor's life, and I will not allow anyone to insult the house of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. These gentlemen are behaving scandalously. If anyone else says a word against Franz Ferdinand, I'll shoot him down. And they all shouted, "The funeral march!"
It happened here, on the Faultline, among the Ruthenian peasants and the Bosnian artisans and the Transylvanian subsistence farmers. For half a century, they provisioned an army with nothing much to do but drink and gamble and improve the hour with casual adulteries. And yet, these quiet local communities were also the incipient nationalists who brought the world to an end. Why? What made the Bosnians side with the Empire and the Galicians with the Tsar? Not language, not religion. After the war, these Uniat Ukrainians ended up part of Poland. It's a recurrent feature of this crack across history. All these fiercely independent minorities are mirrors of each other. Bosnians and Bosniaks, Hungarians and Ruthenes, Orthodox, Catholic, Uniat, whatever the language, whatever the faith, one thing united them. They were all someone else's subjects. What price independence if you have to import your water and your energy from your one-time oppressors? Another Europe is rushing out to meet us. We crossed the Polish border an hour ago, and already we've travelled forward 50 years, if not 100. The fields are meticulously laid out. The haystacks are neatly bundled. Not a goat or a wooden cart in sight. Heavens, we're clocking up 100 miles an hour, and the toilets smell of disinfectant. We've left the hegemony of the old Soviet Union behind. It's easy to forget that we're following historical tracks here. Not Habsburg ones, although we're hugging the northern border of the old empire through the lands picked up by Franz Josef in the last partition of Poland. Not even Russian tracks, although this is the route the Russian army took in 1945, when Poland, Hungary and Romania were swept into the Soviet sphere of influence. No, the tracks we're following are railway tracks, and the trains which traversed them carried the Jews of Chernivtsi and Lviv on a one-way journey. Just look at the place names on our route. Oswiecim, Treblinka. And so it will be through Poland and Slovakia until we reach Bratislava and the Danube once again. Neil Asherson, the finest of all writers on Eastern Europe, once said that it was almost impossible to evoke the atmosphere and life of the Habsburg Crown lands now that all the Jews have gone. He's probably right. The fragmented little communities of Chernivtsi and Lviv are a valiant hangover from those times, but the magnet of Israel and America is strong, and they're unlikely to survive more than another generation. It's difficult to believe that Galician and Bukovinan Jews once played a central role in the political and economic life of these parts, or that Trieste and Budapest had such well-established Jewish communities that they built Europe's two largest and grandest synagogues. The best we can do is to piece together the shards in the Jewish museums scattered across Europe. In Prague, in Budapest, and here in Bratislava, where the courtyard is guarded by a wooden hearse with Hebrew script on the side. The director of the Jewish Museum here is Professor Pavel Mešťan.
Nemci okupovali Slovensko, pretože je treba povedať, že
the Germans occupied Slovakia. It was at this point that Slovakia was established as an independent state. Its president was a Catholic priest. This Catholic priest, Josef Tiso, declared to Slovak citizens that taking property from Jews is a Christian act, because we are only reclaiming what Jews have stolen from Slovaks. When Slovakia negotiated with Germany to resolve the Jewish question, it was agreed that she would receive 500 marks for each Jew transported. There's a real paradox here as I perceive it. The Museum of the Holocaust in Israel has an award which it gives to non-Jews who have rescued Jews. Slovakia is in prime position among those honored. So there is genuine evidence that Slovaks rescued Jews.
Bratislava, 60 kilometers from Vienna, but light years away from Austria. The city which paid the Germans to transport its Jews to the camps, and then received an award from Israel for the huge number of Jews secretly saved. Soft and sweet, and always slipping out of sight. It has tasteful Baroque townhouses in pretty pastel shades. It has an imperial coffee house, all right. The Café Meyer here on Hlavny Náměstí. But the coffee's like everything else. Almost Viennese, but not quite. Bratislava's had its moments, but the moments didn't last. The dark side of nationalism put Josef Tiso into power in 1940 when the Nazis took control, with catastrophic results for Bratislava's Jews. Many of the old hardline communists took refuge here when Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution was followed by a velvet divorce between Czechs and Slovaks. Which side will win? The centrifugal force of nationalism? Or the centripetal force, which has found a new empire to aspire to? Neither holy nor Roman, and based this time in Brussels. Difficult to say. It's been a long journey. Time to return to the capital of Campania we left 6 weeks ago. For my first cup of Viennese coffee in 6 weeks, I've chosen the vaulted spaces of the Café Central, just down the street from the Mikhaila Tor. It's not my favourite Viennese cafe. The Café Central is spruce and touristy, and nothing like the proving ground for world destruction that was essayist Karl Kraus's celebrated final comment on this city. But it does have the best coffee in Vienna, and after the filthy stuff I've been drinking almost everywhere except Lviv, I'm prepared to say it might be the best in the world. To find a table here, you have to pass this unnervingly lifelike seated sculpture of the poet Peter Altenberg, who was as much a fixture here as his static likeness. Like so many of the writers and artists who shaped the culture of Vienna and the wider world during the years before the First World War, he was an outsider. Sitting here, I remember all the other cafes on our journey. The comfortable San Marco in Trieste, the grand Gerbeau on Vörösmarty tér in Budapest, and the surprising Vienna in Lviv. For those who were centrifugal, whether through choice or destiny, these coffee houses were Vienna made manifest, a last echo of the dynastic principle in everyday life. And then I remember Fellner and Helmer's many opera houses, and all the Kaiser yellow stations, waiting with their pretty little flower boxes and stuffy bow-tied waiters, for the next imperial progress. For those who were centripetal, pulled by Vienna's magnetic force, like Gustav Mahler, they were a promise of greater things to come.
The Habsburg Empire in the 19th century could not be referred to as a golden age. But if we go back and ask the people who were concerned or their descendants, you will get a completely different picture.
Dr. Valeria Heuberger.
And if we would ask, for example, aged Jews living now in Slovakia, then I think that Habsburg Empire would get very good marks.
Dr. Charles Ingrau.
Well, my feeling is in eliminating the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you create a huge cavity, a huge power vacuum in political terms. It took us a century to overcome the incredible trauma of taking a large state and eliminating it, and then expecting these other states to get along with all the ethnic conflicts that they were brewing.
Prince Karl Schwarzenberg.
I do think there are two possibilities. Either they become, as soon as possible, members of the European Union, or blindness in the West appears again, as you saw it with the peacemakers of 1819, and we leave these nations out in the cold. Then I'm afraid the hell we prepared for them in the 20th century will go in the 21st century.
This is the Kapuzinergruft, the vault below the unremarkable Capuchin church, which lies halfway between Vienna's two principal places of worship, St. Stephen's Cathedral and the Opera House. Down there in the dark lie the bones of all the kings and queens, emperors and empresses of Campania. Their hearts are buried separately in the Augustine church up the road, very ecumenical. Here they are, enclosed in black catafalques, guarded by grinning skulls, Francis I and Maria Theresa. And here's Franz Josef himself, flanked by his unfortunate son and his poor wife, both of whom died violent deaths. No stone skulls for Franz Josef, just the simple word Pax repeated on the uplights around the room. The peace that his extraordinary 68-year reign failed at last to bring. This whole mausoleum is a grim reminder that death is the central proposition of dynasticism. The imperial process was a dialogue with death. The Habsburgs married their way across Central and Eastern Europe to cheat his scythe. And in the end, death cheated the dynasty, like the hooded figure in Bergman's Seventh Seal, and the very peoples whom Franz Josef served austerely for 7 decades brought his empire tumbling to the ground. Oh yes, I know. It was rigid, and it was bureaucratic, and it was anachronistic. But as the district official says in one of Yosef Roth's other stories, The Bust of the Emperor, when he refuses to acknowledge that the Kaiser has died and the empire with him, my emperor's house had many rooms, and you could move freely and without fear between them. 11 countries and 28 passport controls in 6 weeks. So ask the Hungarians of Cluj, or the Pen Club of Sarajevo, or the Jewish community of Chernivtsi. Have we really achieved any better? At Trianon? At Yalta? In the ruins of the Berlin Wall? Time for the plane. Thank you for travelling with me.
The Kaiser's Crypt was written and produced by Dennis Marks, with technical presentation by Tony Wass and Tim Alcock. Faultline is a director's cut production for BBC Radio 3.